the taboo of death was getting to a ridiculous degree. Nobody in the nation would talk about it. There was nowhere really to provide the dignity and care that was needed for those who were dying.
There was a habit of lying to people about their illness, not telling them they were dying, and so not talking about death and not talking about terminal illness. The difference was that we started to work with the truth.
40 years ago, when palliative care was very young, nobody knew about palliative care and end-of-life care. The challenges and the obstacles they had to overcome to get where they are today. There was a few real people there who really felt this need to ensure that Plymouth had great end-of-life care. It's just been inspirational.
The NHS had changed so dramatically since the war, since it was created, and death was becoming much, much more hospitalised. The taboo of death was getting to a ridiculous degree so that nobody in the nation would talk about it, and there was nowhere really to provide the dignity and care that was needed for those who were dying. This became really quite a wide movement in the early 80s, that we recognised that the care in hospital and actually even the care at home was not sufficient for the dying. And it was a mixture of faith and fundraising and knowledge and people like Sheila Cassidy, who had the tenacity and the insight to know what was needed.
I worked really by chance in the radiotherapy department, and so I used to go round the wards in the evening, and that was how I got to be talking to people who were dying and realise how important it was to talk to people, to listen to them, and that was really how I was chosen to be the first hospice doctor. There was a habit of lying to people about their illness, not telling them they were dying, and so not talking about death and not talking about terminal illness. The difference was that we started to work with the truth, because it's actually very difficult talking to people about dying, and I think it was when I started to do that things started to change.
Well, there was a group of parishioners attached to St Andrew's Church that were very interested and very keen on the works of the hospice in London, which was St Joseph's Hospice. That was the very first hospice, and then later on it was St Christopher's Hospice, and they had been to visit St Joseph's Hospice, and they came back and they decided that this is what St Luke's needed. So they got together and they started doing fundraising events, on quite a large scale. And eventually they managed to accumulate enough money to buy Serena House.
The first hospice was in Plymouth, and it was an old private house really, which was converted. I say it was converted. That meant it had a few more bathrooms, and that was it. And we had 3 patients in a ward at the back, 3 patients in a ward at the front, and then we had one little room by itself.
We used every inch of space of this townhouse, rather hysterically actually, because first of all I think we just started with 5 or 6 beds, but we very soon realised we had to have as many beds as we possibly could at the time. So we had people squashed into all corners, and the downstairs sitting room turned into a ward, and the doctor's office was the bathroom, and it had to take it in turns with the bathroom. So we had this special sort of desk thing that sat across the bath that we could write on. I mean, we never really questioned it. It was quite extraordinary. In the nurse's office next door, where we all crammed in, I don't know how, we must have sat on each other's laps, I think. But we made it work. It was a terrific, pioneering, developing situation, and very exciting and hugely full of comradeship.
Every person is making a difference. You know the story about the cleaner at NASA who, when asked what his job is, it's to put a man on the moon? Well, everybody at St Luke's, their job is to make sure that people are looked after really well at the end of their life.
We wanted the patients to feel more like people that they used to be, rather than just a patient. So we used to have hairdressers, we used to have chiropody, all those sorts of things that we could offer people, which made them feel that they were, you know, people again. And of course, we would encourage relatives to come in, and we would take people down to the garden so they could sit in the garden, you know, and carry them down the stairs if need be.
It may seem to be lovey-dovey, but in fact it's skilled medicine, because you have, if you're going to tell someone they're going to die, you have to be very sure that they are. The skill of diagnosis and treatment, and you have to be quite sure that there's nothing more you can do to get them out. And so I was very, much the doctor in that, but also the listener, learning to listen and asking the right questions and seeing what people knew about their illness, and being completely at ease talking about death and dying with individual peoples and with families.
Well, a lot of people were really against it, because especially doctors' surgeries, because they said, well, we do the job well enough, what do you want somebody else for? And that was, a lot of people thought that way, but there was an awful lot of people that thought it was an absolutely marvellous idea.
People say, how could you cope with working somewhere so depressing? It's like, no, it's not depressing. Sometimes it's sad, but if you know that you are making a difference, if you know that that person's passing and their family's experience will be better because we've been there, then that's got to be a good thing, hasn't it?
The first charity shop was at the bottom of New George Street, and I, with the administrator at the time, had been around to see several properties to try and find something suitable. And eventually we came across this one, which seemed absolutely ideal. It was quite central in town in those days. And that's where we first started. And of course we had so much stuff to fill the shelves with. We had to have shop fitters in to fit the shop out. And then all the goods just arrived continually. And once again, far too much for the shop.
And so we made do with Serena House, which was an incredible thing that they purchased. They owned it, the trust of St Luke's did at that stage. And as I said, it was quite a juggling act fitting into Serena House. And the care of those with advanced life-threatening illness and those who were dying was so escalated. People in Plymouth suddenly realised that here was a resource that they really, really wanted and wanted to support. So there was no lack of support. There was absolutely no lack of referrals. There was a constant one person in, one person out in order to fit into the beds. And we squashed as many beds in. But after about 5 years, I think that takes us to about 1987, we realised that this was not how we should be. We were also mildly jealous of other hospices that had been purpose-built for their requirements, and we could see how the care of the patients could be vastly improved in a purpose-built site. And at that point we started thinking about the Town Chapel site.
The administrator had been onto the council to see if they had any spare ground that we could actually build a hospice on, and he said that they came back with a reply that there was one up at near Jennycliff, next door to Fort Stamford, and if you go onto the road up to Jennycliff and overlook, it's just a land full of brambles. So, but you could see the potential.
Remember, there was a huge love of St Luke's in the city and the surrounding areas. We had tremendous amount of fundraising from all sorts of groups, and it was their favoured charity all around the city and around the countryside.
We started Buy a Brick campaign for £1. And so anybody that wanted to could buy bricks for the new hospice, and that way we raised an awful lot of money.
The City Council was incredibly generous in terms of the land, but of course it would have a slightly two-edged sword, the land, because they gave us this wonderful piece of land with its view, but it had hugely powerful Ministry of Defence cables underneath it. And I remember it cost us £50,000 to move the cables. That was a lot of money in the end of the 80s.
It was very different because we had 20 beds and had the space and the bathrooms, and that it was just pure luxury, really.
We suddenly had all this space and all these wonderful new gadgets, all sorts of complications, but nothing that we couldn't get over. where to put people after they died was always a problem, because we didn't actually build it in at the time.
All the secretarial staff all had computers, which we'd never had before. We walked in there and there was a computer on the desk, which was very nice after using just the normal hand typewriter.
Well, we literally moved 1 week. We took some patients with us. We couldn't clear the hospice as well. And also we rather wanted to have someone, one or two, to come across. So we rather subtly, I remember it, got some slightly less sick patients into the old hospice that would be capable of being moved to the new hospice.
I think it's absolutely amazing that there's this culmination of 6 years of work, and that the people of Plymouth and this hospice has come to this stage now. I think it's brilliant, absolutely marvellous.
Prince Charles was a friend of the hospice. Mary instigated him to come down and officially open the hospice for us.
Oh, it was a terrific buzz. I mean, the whole place, Turn Chapel filled up, all that green space in front of St Luke's was full of crowds cheering, flags, they lined the drive as he drove in. He got really a hero's and a royal welcome. I don't think Turn Chapel had ever had a royal visit before, so it was hugely exciting. He was so aware of the hospice movement and so aware of the work we were doing, and so generous in his attitude towards the hospice movement, that back in the late 80s we felt very honoured and very pleased to have him.
He would always say that, you know, he would stay for half an hour or whatever it was. He always overran his time and stayed for double the time probably. One particular time there was a man that was dying basically, and his relatives were very keen to meet Prince Charles, and I said, well, would you mind, because they would really like to see you. He went in and he said, I'm really sorry to intrude at this time. He was very, very nice actually, and very genuine, and they were just delighted that he'd actually taken the bother to go and say hello and that sort of thing.
I was the Chief Executive of St Luke's Hospice Plymouth from about January 1994 through to December 2015, so over 20 years worth. We were operating as mainly an inpatient unit. We had a daycare service and did some outpatients, and we're beginning to do some innovative things, some lymphedema care and getting an occupational therapist in post. But what it felt to me we needed to change was the patient needed to be the patient wherever they were, not just when they were in our inpatient unit. I felt that we really needed to start thinking about an integrated care service, where we had services in the community, we had services in the hospital. And so we started down the road of trying to work much more closely with the community services and the hospital. And eventually the whole thing was coming together. The patient is the patient wherever they are. The patient's bed is the patient's bed. It doesn't just have to be an inpatient bed.
We've changed dramatically over the last 40 years. We've learnt a lot around palliative care. We've learnt a lot about people's needs and wishes. You know, we know that people do want to die at home with their loved ones around them. So to me, I think as hospices evolve in the future, it'll be more about putting the patient really at the centre of everything we do. Listen to them, listen to their families, what do they want. What's amazing to me is that 40 years on, that support and love for St Luke's is still there. It's absolutely incredible. And there's no doubt about it, we couldn't have got where we are today without the generosity of the community.
I think the triple of hospice care, community care and hospital care that we've got in Plymouth is the way forward. I've done a lot of work since I retired with probably 7 or 8 different hospices, and they've all got different takes on it. But what they're all trying to do is what's been achieved in Plymouth, is to amalgamate the care so that the patient on entry into their phase when they need palliative care has a seamless service. And I think that is one of the great things that I think must continue and will continue. And I think St Luke's has been one of the leaders in this, to be honest. And that's what I would like to see the future holding for.